Hey guys, tonight we descend into the candlelit corridors of a lonely German castle, where one man, young, bold, and beautiful, stepped into the shadows and never walked out again. The stones are cold, the torchlight flickers. Somewhere in this vast maze of stone and whispers, a secret waits. You run your fingers along the damp wall. Something about this place feels expectant, like it's holding its breath. There's a soft wind curling under the door, but no one seems to know where it comes from. You move deeper. Every hallway looks the same, but you could swear the temperature dropped. And then, a set of heavy doors. You push. It creaks open. Inside, there's a silence so deep it feels alive. And just like that, you've entered a mystery that stumped historians, inspired novelists, and possibly made a few tour guides whisper nervously after dark. Oh, and by the way, you probably won't survive this if you're the type who needs their mysteries neatly wrapped up with a bow. Just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I'm always curious how far this sleepy little corner of the internet reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through the halls of the Schloss, an elegant castle in Hanover that now houses Germany's state parliament, but once held secrets behind its stone walls. The year is 1694, and the castle is quieter than usual. No celebration, no courtly fanfare, just the lingering tension of something that's about to snap. You glance up, the tapestries rustle without breeze. The castle itself is a beauty. Built over the centuries and stages, with Renaissance bones and Baroque flourishes, it's one of those places where time seems to tangle. You half expect to turn a corner and run into a knight juggling scrolls and espresso, but tonight, everything feels subdued. The staff whisper, the guards stiffen as you pass. You can smell smoke, not from a fire, but from hundreds of candles burning low. They don't light torches here, not anymore. And then footsteps, light, confident, slightly impatient. That's him, Philip Christoph von Königsmarck. He struts more than walks, really like a man who knows the world will forgive him anything. And it kind of has. Born into Swedish nobility but raised all over Europe, Philip is a classic 17th century bad boy with a soft jawline and an excellent tailor. His letters are spicy, his fencing is sharp, and his affairs, well, let's just say his calendar is rarely blank. He's the kind of guy whose enemies secretly want to be him, the kind whose boots click just a little louder in the hall. And tonight, he's walking into Schloss with one goal: to see his lover, a princess. The affair is dangerous, reckless, and not exactly secret. That's the thing about royal courts. Nothing stays quiet. Gossip moves faster than horse-drawn mail, and Philip's name is always dancing on someone's tongue. But tonight, he thinks he's careful. He's arranged a secret meeting, slipped past the guards, and made it to the appointed door. And that's the last time anyone sees him alive. Or at all. No one hears a scream. No scuffle. No crash of metal. Just silence. As if the castle itself swallowed him whole. You walk the same path he did. Past the grand staircases, beneath the oil portraits of long-forgotten dukes with excellent mustaches. The door is still there, though it's been replaced since then. Nothing stays untouched after centuries. You press your hand against it. Cool wood, solid, unremarkable. But something is missing. A man, 6 feet tall, wearing court finery, just gone. Historians still argue whether Philip ever made it to the meeting at all. Some claim he was ambushed en route. Others suggest he was intercepted by guards loyal to the jealous husband of his royal paramour. A few even believe he slipped away voluntarily, leaving behind the chaos he'd caused. But that doesn't explain the blood. It's faint, just a smear, found later on the wall of a side passage. The cleaning staff mentioned it only in passing, like one might mention a spilled goblet of wine. Quirky, right? One of those little details that never made it into the official record. The official story? There isn't much of one. No body, no confession, no trial. Just whispers, and that growing ache of uncertainty. You lean into the silence now. Imagine being one of the castle maids. the ones who cleaned the tapestries and tidied the hall. You hear that someone important has vanished. You saw him hours ago. He winked at you, maybe. And now poof. Would you tell anyone what you saw? Or would you stay quiet and keep your job? You reach the grand hall again. The candles have burned lower. The castle feels different somehow, like it's remembering something it doesn't want to share. And just like that, you're in it. The mystery, the legend, the true story that inspired novels, ghost tales, and late-night rabbit holes on the internet. Because Philipp Christoph von Königsmarck walked into Leineschloss Castle and never walked out. You follow the echo of Philipp's footsteps, retracing his story back through the finely polished corridors of European aristocracy. Before he became a mystery, he was a man of many titles, endless charm, and, frankly, an exhausting amount of drama. Even as a child, Philip seemed destined to make headlines, or at least keep chancellors up at night. He was born in 1665 to the illustrious Königsmarck family, a Swedish-German noble house with enough history to fill a castle wing. His grandfather had fought in the 30 Years' War, and his father was a celebrated general. As for Philip, well, let's just say he inherited the taste for adventure but channeled it mostly into swordplay, poetry, and affairs of the heart. You're watching him grow up now wealthy, multilingual, and utterly incapable of keeping a low profile. He trained as a soldier, yes, but mostly to wear the uniform well. He moved through the courts of Europe like a charming thunderstorm, writing scandalous letters, getting into duels, and smiling his way out of punishments that would have landed anyone else in a dungeon. You pause in the gallery. Paintings of ancestors stare down at you with powdered wigs and the kind of eyes that say, "We've seen things." One of them might be Karl Johann von Königsmarck, Philip's older brother, less charming, more responsible, which is probably why Karl ended up stabbed to death in 1673 under suspicious circumstances involving a rival family, and surprise, another royal affair. You see a pattern forming? Now, Philip wasn't technically supposed to be a problem. He was the third son not likely to inherit much, but that freedom gave him something better than land. It gave him movement. He traveled across France, Italy, Sweden, and the German states, serving as an officer here, attending salons there. And wherever he went, rumors followed like a very committed shadow. Here's your historical fact for the night. During the late 1600s, the European aristocracy was essentially one big, passive-aggressive soap opera. Every duke was watching his cousin. Every ambassador was spying for two different kings. It was like Game of Thrones, but with better tailoring and worse dental hygiene. And into this tangled web strolled Philipp von Königsmarck, with a smirk and a letter opener. But let's zoom in on his most dangerous adventure, the court of Hanover. You slip into the grand ballroom. Imagine it buzzing with music, lace, powdered wigs, and not a single sincere smile. This is where Philip met Sophia Dorothea of Celle. She was clever, beautiful, and unfortunately already married. And not just to anyone. She was wed to George Louis of Hanover, who'd eventually become King George I of Great Britain. Yes, that George. The one you read about in textbooks, and maybe mistook for a nice-sounding street name. At this point in the story, he was just the cranky heir to the electorate of Hanover. And if we're being honest, their marriage was less romance, more royal contract signed in lowercase misery. You stand near the windows where Sophia once stared into the gardens, dreaming of escape. She'd been forced to marry George for political reasons because heaven forbid a princess chooses her own husband in the 17th century. George, for his part, didn't seem thrilled either. He spent most of their marriage ignoring her, spending time with his mistresses, and complaining that she was too French. She wasn't really, but it was Hanover, and that was enough. Into this mess walked Philip. Their connection was immediate, intense, and more than a little dangerous. You picture their first meeting, him reciting poetry, her half smiling like she'd finally met someone who remembered what conversation felt like. They began exchanging letters, dozens of them, love letters, smuggled in coat linings and hidden in hollowed-out book bindings. They weren't careful, but then again, forbidden love rarely is. Now for your fringe tidbit. One of their letters reportedly included a coded plan to run away together. Yes, an actual elopement scheme, complete with bribes, a carriage, and vague hope that the King of France might shelter them. It sounds romantic, until you remember they were under constant surveillance, surrounded by spies, and living in a court that punished scandal the way modern people delete browser history, aggressively and without discussion. You walk through the West Wing now, the place where most of the domestic staff slept. Imagine the gossip. The royal mistress isn't shocking that standard court fare, but a royal princess having an affair with a Swedish nobleman who had already been accused of seducing half the duchesses in Europe? That was next level. Historians still argue whether the relationship was ever physical or just an emotionally charged flirtation with poetic overtones. There's no proof of anything, and yet the heat in those letters suggests they were very much not just pen pals. But Philip didn't care about discretion. And Sophia? She was trapped in a life chosen for her. Their affair became public enough that courtiers began placing bets. When would they run? How would it end? Would George have Philip arrested? Exiled? Or worse? You pass a side hallway now. Quiet. The kind of place where secrets might rest for centuries. And it occurs to you maybe Philip knew this couldn't end well. But he kept writing, kept sneaking into the castle, kept seeing her. Because he believed the rules didn't apply to him. Maybe they didn't. Until they did. And somewhere down this hallway, whether in a drawing room, a servant's passage, or a quiet chamber with the door ajar, Philip made his final appearance. The castle grows still again. You can almost hear him now. A laugh, a door creaking open, a promise whispered in the dark, and then nothing. You step into a smaller, more private room, something between a study and a salon, filled with faded elegance and lingering perfume. The kind of place where secrets are traded over tea. This, perhaps, is where they met most often, where Philip and Sophia Dorothea whispered their escape plans, read each other's letters aloud, and dared to dream of a life outside castle walls. Tonight, the air here still feels charged. The kind of room that absorbs emotion, then holds onto it like damp wallpaper. You can almost hear their hushed voices, her delicate laugh, his poetic, overly confident tone. You wonder if she ever told him to stop showing off. Probably not. He was far too good at it. Their letters are the heart of this story. Pages of ink-stained longing, coded promises, and shared frustration. They called each other by flower names. He once signed as the faithful tulip. She responded as the constant rose. It's sweet, sure, but also kind of tragic, because if you're calling each other that much, you're probably stuck somewhere you don't want to be. The written word was their safe haven, and their biggest risk. See, in 17th century courts, you didn't just write love notes. You wrote blackmail, evidence, traps. Every piece of paper could be used against you. But Philip and Sophia wrote anyway, pages upon pages of raw emotion, passed through trusted servants, hidden in laundry baskets or inside hollowed-out fruit. Yes, really. There's a theory one message was delivered inside a carved-out pear. You won't find that on Duolingo. One surviving letter reads, "We must flee before the moon is new again." Dramatic? Yes, but urgency tends to make poets out of desperate people. Historians still argue whether those letters were even real, whether they were forged later to justify Sophia's eventual punishment. But many scholars believe in their authenticity, the tone, the handwriting, the paper, all consistent with the time and with their styles. Plus, let's be honest, if you're going to fake letters, you don't fill them with flower metaphors and stolen glances. You go for something juicier. A confession, a scandal. This was romance, not espionage. Or maybe both. You cross the room and run your hand along the edge of the writing desk. It's not the original, most furniture from that era is long gone, but the style is right. Baroque curves, carved legs, dark oak. You picture Philip leaning over it, scribbling frantically, blotting the ink with shaking hands. Maybe he was afraid, maybe he wasn't. He'd danced this close to danger before and lived to write about it. But now, the stakes were different. Sophia was royalty. Married. Trapped. Her husband, George, may have lacked charm, but he had power. And his mother... Ah, yes. That woman was none other than Electress Sophia of Hanover, one of the sharpest minds in the Holy Roman Empire. She was not the type to let her daughter-in-law run off with a Swedish playboy. Not without consequences. One of the letters reportedly mentioned bribing guards. Another, a possible meeting point near the castle stables, just before dawn. This wasn't just pillow talk, it was planning. Action, two people staring down the biggest rule of royal life. You don't leave. And yet, they tried. Or maybe just talked about trying. That's the thing, no one knows how far their plan got. But we do know that on July 1, 1694, Philip received a note, a summons to meet her. Perhaps she'd finally agreed. Perhaps the escape was happening that night. So, you watch him prepare. He dresses in dark velvet, expensive but understated. Not flashy tonight. His sword is strapped, but loosely. He doesn't expect to use it. He carries no bag, no money, just a note in his coat pocket and a silver ring he plans to give her. The last time he wore it, he kissed her hand through tears. That kind of drama. He walks down the hall, greets a few guards. They nod. He's a familiar face, always strolling the halls after dark. A man in love with a woman he can't have, but isn't willing to lose. You watch him disappear around the corner, and then time stops. Because after that moment, after that exact turn, he ceases to exist. Not a sound, not a footprint, not a single human witness. The castle was full of people that night. Guards, cooks, servants. But no one saw what happened. Which leads to our next question. Who did know? You ease down another hallway. This one's narrower, dimly lit. Servants' access. Not part of the official blueprints. The kind of place a guard could lead someone somewhere private. The kind of place you might hear muffled voices and silence. Later, when people asked where Philip had gone, they got shrugs, blank looks. A few, "I believe he left early," murmurs. But no horses were taken. No one rode through the gates. And the guards on duty? Their logs from that night mysteriously vanished. All of it too neat, too quiet. Which brings us to a quirky little historical detail. A few years later, during minor renovations, a mason working in the castle's western wing noticed that one of the interior walls sounded hollow. He reported it. Nothing came of it. The wall was never opened. But the rumor persisted somewhere in Lina Schloss. There's a sealed-off room, one that may still contain answers. Or bonus. You pause beside that wall now. It looks normal. Just plaster and paint. But you lean close. Tap it. Nothing. Or maybe everything. The room behind it might not even exist. Or it might hold the final echo of a man who wrote too many letters and loved the wrong person. All you know is after that night, Philip Christoph von Königsmarck became something else. A ghost. A story. A whisper inside a castle that's grown good at keeping secrets. You leave the intimacy of hidden letters and shadowy corridors behind and step into a world colder than stone duty. Not the kind that inspires loyalty and honor, but the kind that wraps its fingers around your neck and squeezes until there's no room left for breath, let alone love. You're standing now in the Grand Marriage Hall of Celle, a place built more for formality than affection. Gilded frames hang heavy on the walls, cherubs frozen mid-smirk above towering fireplaces. This is where Princess Sophia Dorothea of Celle was led. 17 years old, and not so gently nudged into a marriage that looked golden on the outside and felt like a lead corset on the inside. She married George Louis of Hanover in 1682. Her cousin, her somewhat reluctant match. On paper, it was the perfect union, two branches of the same royal house joining hands to strengthen their claim to future thrones. In practice, a masterclass in emotional frostbite. George was stern, impatient, and had all the romantic energy of a church pew. He preferred military matters to poetry, favored duty over delight, and had an entire collection of long silences that he reserved specifically for his wife. You can practically hear it now, the clink of silverware at a dinner table where no one looks up. To be fair, George wasn't the villain of some gothic novel. He was just indifferent, which might be worse, really. Sophia, on the other hand, was lively. She loved music, dancing, conversation, and was widely known for her sharp wit. She wasn't rebellious by nature, but try locking any bright mind in a dim marriage, and you're going to spark a flame eventually. You cross the ballroom floor, now faded and restored too many times. Imagine the wedding day. Guests lined up in powdered rows, jewels glittering like dewdrops in candlelight. The dress, the fanfare, the silence in Sophia's eyes. Everyone pretended it was a love match, but even the musicians knew better. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Marriages like this were the currency of European power. Love didn't factor in, titles, alliances, and bloodlines did. Sophia's dowry was massive, which made her useful. Her happiness? Optional. And because you're paying attention, you notice something important. She was never meant to have choices. Enter Philip von Königsmarck. Not a royal, not wealthy enough to change the world, but charming enough to set fire to hers. Years into her marriage, after the cold had truly set in, Philip became a kind of warmth she hadn't known in years. Their letters say as much. They don't gush, they ache. Two people craving something gentle in a world ruled by hard stares and heavy crowns. But it wasn't just George she had to fear. His mother, Electress Sophia, the original Sophia, if you're keeping track, was a formidable force. One of the most respected minds in Europe. A thinker, a writer, and fiercely loyal to her son. She viewed Sophia Dorothea with suspicion, even contempt, called her childish and disobedient. And perhaps most importantly, she believed that the royal line should be protected from scandal at all costs, even if that meant silencing a whisper before it became a scream. So you walk through the family chapel now. It's empty, cold, ornate. The kind of space built for sermons, not safety. You can hear the faint echo of expectations preached from the pulpit: obedience, patience, decorum, all the things Sophia Dorothea was running out of. There's a fringe tidbit for you. At one point, it was rumored that George had a mistress living in the same castle, just a few corridors away. Some claimed he visited her more frequently than his wife, and that Sophia was expected to simply accept this, smile at court, keep up appearances, which she did, until she didn't. That's what makes her story so haunting. She tried to do what was expected for years, but there comes a moment when compliance becomes a cage, and Philip, reckless as he was, had a key, or at least claimed he did. Historians still argue whether she truly loved him, or if he was simply her only exit. There are scholars who believe she saw in him not a soulmate, but a smuggler of possibilities. Others insist theirs was a genuine romance, rooted in trust and shared despair. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Real affection, tangled with desperation. You glance out the chapel window. Rain begins to mist the glass. It softens the landscape outside. You imagine her doing the same, looking out, imagining a different life. One with sunlight, with freedom, with someone who actually spoke to her at dinner. But you also imagine her fear. Because let's be real, running away from a royal court in the 1690s wasn't like booking a weekend getaway. It was treason, it was exile, it was possibly death. And still, she considered it. That's what makes this whole tale so quietly terrifying. Not just that a man disappeared, but that a woman dared to want more, and in wanting, doomed them both. You return now to the grand hallway, where golden sconces line the walls like watchful eyes, where guards knew not to ask questions, where every conversation was overheard twice, once in words, once in implications. And somewhere in that space, on a quiet night in July, the future cracked. Philip stepped into danger willingly. Sophia, perhaps, tried to follow. Or perhaps she waited, and only silence came back. And now, centuries later, you walk these same halls, the same creaking wood beneath your feet, the same chill in the corners. Only now, the doors are all locked, and the secrets echo louder because of it. You enter the wing of Celle Castle, where tapestries once swayed in the draft, and velvet curtains dulled the gossip echoing down stone walls. The year is still 1694. Everything smells faintly of old wax, mulled wine, and secrets simmering just beneath the surface. Tonight, the tension in the air isn't imagined, it's very real. A plan is in motion, but nobody seems to know who's actually pulling the strings. Whispers trail behind you like perfume. She's going to flee. He's coming tonight. Have you seen the guards change their route? The court is full of half-truths and whole lies, and every earl or chambermaid thinks they know more than they actually do. Here's where things tighten. Philip wasn't just a love interest. He had started acting different, bolder, talking openly about eloping with Sophia, discussing escape routes, allegedly offering bribes to guards and servants. And remember, this isn't the sort of thing you post on the town bulletin board. This is capital treason, wrapped in lace, and bad timing. Still, he made arrangements. According to reconstructed testimonies and a few fragile documents that historians guard like family heirlooms, Philip had arranged to meet Sophia inside Leineschloss that night. She would give the signal. He would arrive under the cover of darkness. Together, they would flee, possibly through a network of sympathetic nobles, possibly to France, possibly to disaster. You stand now in the antechamber where Philip was said to have entered. Nothing extraordinary about it. A few wooden chairs, a tall window overlooking the courtyard. You can hear the clock tower chime the hour, just as it must have then. There's a particular historical fact worth noting here. Royal palaces in the 17th century were teeming with staff: guards, cooks, scribes, valets, hairdressers, falconers, and people who just carried other people's gloves. It was nearly impossible to move unnoticed, which makes what happened next even more chilling. No one saw him leave. In a building this full, with every corridor watched or staffed, no one can say what became of Philip after he entered. He was seen by multiple witnesses walking into the castle that evening, confident, possibly even humming, and after that, nothing. You peer out into the stone courtyard. Torches flicker in wrought iron sconces. You try to picture his route down the corridor, past the chapel, into one of the rear salons. But none of it matters, because no one saw him again. Of course, rumors sprang up like weeds. A jealous husband had him killed, a secret duel gone wrong, a misstep on the stairs, and a broken neck covered up to avoid royal embarrassment. Some even say he never made it into the castle, that he was intercepted at the gates by George's men and quietly disposed of in the woods. But none of these theories account for the strangest details. Take the boots, for instance, the quirky tidbit. His boots were found the next morning in the castle's laundry room, polished, warm, and absolutely not where boots should be if you're making a midnight getaway. No cloak, no sword, no hat, just 2 boots, neatly placed as if someone had finished wearing them and wouldn't be needing them again. And there was something else, something barely whispered about, a blood smear, faint, high on the wall of a side passage, noticed by a servant girl whose name never made it into the records. She claimed it looked like a handprint. Red, dry, quickly cleaned. By the time anyone official came to look, it was gone. A suspicious wine spill, they called it. Not that anyone was particularly curious. No investigation was opened. No real questions asked. And if you're thinking that sounds deliberate, you're not alone. You turn a corner now and find yourself in a narrower hallway, lesser used. The walls lean slightly inward, giving it that unsettling funhouse compression, like the building itself wants to keep you here. It's quiet, too quiet. This was the servants' wing, filled with small rooms, odd passages, and places one might vanish if one had a reason to. Some even claim there's a hidden chamber in this part of the castle, though no official blueprint confirms it. Still, if you press your ear to the wall just right, some say you can hear a hollow echo, something behind the stones. Historians still argue whether Philip was killed inside the castle or smuggled out under cover of darkness. Both scenarios have their flaws. If he was killed, where's the body? If he escaped, why did he never contact Sophia again? Why no word? No clue? No dramatic letter from a safe house in Paris? Silence. Complete. And silence, in this context, is suspicious. You take another step and hear a creak beneath your feet. The floorboards here are original centuries old. Philip might have stepped here, or been dragged, or carried. You try not to think about that last part too hard. One more thing. A few years after the disappearance, a young page in service to George claimed he had overheard a conversation between 2 guards. Something about the Swedish ghost and keeping the trapdoor locked. The boy was dismissed the next day and shipped off to the countryside. Nothing was ever confirmed. You press your palm to the cold stone wall now. Solid. Still, but it feels like something is coiled beneath the surface, waiting. The court, of course, moved on. Eventually, Sophia Dorothea was placed under house arrest. The official word? She had behaved inappropriately. No mention of Philip. No trial, just a quiet punishment that would last the rest of her life. And the castle? It buried the truth so deep, even time hasn't been able to unearth it. Not yet, anyway. It's July Honest, 1000, 694. You stand just outside the western wing of Linischloss Castle. The moon hangs low over Hanover like a wary eye, watching every cobblestone and curved shadow. The castle isn't asleep. Not entirely, courts never truly sleep. But it's quieter now. The laughter and music have faded. The servants have disappeared behind the walls. The guards exchange looks rather than words, and Philip von Königsmarck is walking toward his fate. He arrives at the castle in the late evening, under the pretense of a routine visit. He's dressed in his usual dark finery, well cut, embroidered lightly at the cuffs, the kind of outfit that says, "I belong here, don't ask questions." His sword swings lightly at his hip. His boots click confidently on the stone. He even nods at the gatekeeper, who nods back with a glance that seems too casual. Or maybe not casual enough. You walk in behind him, trying to keep up. His pace is quick, urgent, but not frantic. He's done this before. These halls have become familiar, haunted, less by ghosts than by longing. He knows the route, down the gallery, left at the second arch, through the paneled corridor. But tonight feels different. Not in the stars aligning romantic way. No. This is the kind of different you feel in your bones, like the air just got thicker. Like you've just stepped inside a story that wants to end. Some say he met someone at the entrance. A man. Or two. They exchanged a few quiet words. No one remembers what was said. No one admits to hearing. But it's possible, likely, even that they weren't strangers. Philip was used to weaving through delicate politics and shifting allegiances. He knew these men, or thought he did. He walks deeper into the castle, and this is the last moment anyone sees him alive. No footsteps echo behind him. No alarm is raised. He doesn't scream. He doesn't fight, at least. Not in any way that left a mess someone couldn't clean up before sunrise. He simply vanishes. You retrace his route, foot by foot. There's the side hallway, narrow and windowless. The staircase to the servants' quarters, tucked behind an unmarked door. The little reading alcove where a lamp still burns. He could have turned into any of these, gone anywhere, and yet none of them yield clues. The strangest part? The guards. They claim they saw nothing. No unusual movement, no disturbance, no horse leaving the stables. According to their records, it was a normal night. Except it wasn't, because the moment Philip failed to appear the next morning, the castle exploded into a quiet, fevered panic. You can hear it now, raised voices behind closed doors, scribes being summoned at odd hours, messengers running through the corridors without their usual swagger. But outside, silence. No public notice, no official statement, just a blank space where a man used to be. And then came the cover-up. Guards were rotated. Servants questioned informally, of course. Philip's personal belongings at the nearby barracks were collected and quietly returned to his family. His letters, especially the ones to Sophia, were confiscated. Some were destroyed. Others were used. Here's a historical fact. The Hanoverian court's version of justice was remarkably efficient when it came to protecting its own. Secrets didn't get out unless someone wanted them to. The disappearance was officially labeled a departure. No need to elaborate. But here's the thing. Someone knew what happened, because a few years later, an English diplomat visiting Hanover wrote in his diary that everyone understood what had occurred to the Swedish count, that he'd been disposed of by order of the court. But no names, no specifics, just another ghost in the stonework. You run your hand along the wall again, feel the dust collect beneath your fingertips. The silence here isn't passive, it's engineered. Someone went to great lengths to erase him. One story, often whispered by generations of castle staff, involves a secret chamber below the kitchens. A place once used for storing firewood or wine or worse. The idea is that Philip was lured there. That it wasn't a scuffle or accident, but a planned disappearance, executed so cleanly it left no stains. That's why the boots were found, they say, because whoever took him knew he wouldn't need them anymore. There's another rumor, darker still, that he was murdered in the castle's chapel, the one rarely used after dark, and buried beneath its altar during renovations. A single blood smear was noticed the next morning, wiped away before the bells even finished ringing. Historians still argue whether these rumors are true or just the kind of tales people tell to fill an unbearable silence. After all, a disappearance with no trace is more unsettling than a murder with blood. The mind needs something to rest on. A body, a suspect, even a lie. But Lenischloss gave the world nothing. And then, suddenly, the narrative flipped. It wasn't Philip who was punished, it was Sophia. Word leaked that she had disgraced herself, that she was unstable, that her behavior had become dangerous to the integrity of the court. She was placed under house arrest permanently. Her children were taken from her. Her name was never spoken again in official circles. You pause at the end of the hallway. There's an old bench against the wall, maybe used by tired guards centuries ago. You sit, and for a moment, you imagine what Philip felt in those final seconds. Was there fear or disbelief? Did he recognize the trap too late? Did he fight? Did he beg? Or was it quick a blade, a fall, a betrayal that struck before he even understood? Or maybe, just maybe, he chose it. One fringe theory suggests Philip never intended to run with Sophia, that it was all theater, that he staged his own disappearance, slipped into a disguise, and vanished into Europe, leaving the chaos behind. A coward's exit, but an effective one. But it doesn't fit, not with what came after, not with the silence that screamed too loudly, not with the look in Sophia's eyes the next day when she realized he was never coming back. You rise now, the walls pressing in again. The castle hasn't answered in 300 years, and it's not about to start. You linger just inside the hall where Philip vanished, boots clicking softly against stone, trying to understand how a person simply stops existing. Not escapes, not hides, just disappears, like mist drawn back into air. But you don't need to look far for clues, because something was left behind, even if the court did everything to pretend otherwise. It begins with the boots, polished, warm, sitting side by side as if carefully removed. Not dropped in a rush, not scuffed like a man fleeing or fighting, just placed. You stare at them now, imagining the absurdity of that moment. The next morning, when a servant found them in the castle laundry, no coat, no sword, no Philip, just the kind of quiet clue that doesn't scream but whispers deeply. Something's wrong. No note, no message, no, "Dear Sophia, I'm running for my life." Just boots. That's the kind of detail that doesn't show up in official records but lives forever in local memory. They weren't cleaned or returned to his quarters. They vanished again, just like him. Then there's the blood. Barely there. A swipe near the eastern gallery. Thin, high on the wall. Too deliberate to be random. Too specific to ignore. It was mentioned by a maid later, decades later, in a letter to a cousin in Bremen. The blood was cleaned up the next morning, she said, quietly. She hadn't been allowed to speak of it at the time. So you crouch there now, fingers tracing a long-gone smear. It's not visible anymore, of course. 300 years of paint, renovations, and willful ignorance tend to scrub away evidence. But the air still holds it. That tension, that strange sense that something terrible happened in a place meant for politeness and lace. Then there's the silence. The guards that night, each claimed nothing unusual. Not a shout, not a footstep out of place, no visitors unaccounted for, no movement in or out after the gates closed, which is, in its own way, the most suspicious thing of all. You glance down the corridor, remembering a strange little rule whispered by castle guides even today. If everything lines up perfectly, it's because someone arranged it to, and that someone may have worn a uniform or a crown. See, Philip was a problem. He wasn't just a lover. He was a liability. Charming, yes, but careless. Loud, proud of his role in Sophia's life. He wrote too much, smiled too broadly, walked down hallways with the confidence of a man who thought the court was his stage, and someone had clearly decided the curtain needed to fall. Now comes the soft-shoed dance of rumor and strategy. Within hours of his disappearance, the castle staff were reallocated, guards reassigned, a few sent home with generous compensation. One or two? Never heard from again. Some historians believe orders came from the very top, possibly even George himself, or his mother, Electress Sophia. Others suggest it was a group decision, a protective gesture, the court defending its own image. And maybe, just maybe, Sophia Dorothea herself was kept in the dark. You walk past her chambers now. The door is closed, but you can feel the atmosphere behind it cold, dim, static. Some say she waited there all night, that she lit a single candle and placed it by the window, a signal to Philip that it was safe to enter. But he never came, and the candle burned to nothing. By morning, the court had already shifted its tone, from vague concern to indignant silence, from "Where is Count Königsmark?" to "He never came," to "He was never expected," to "He was never here." There's a quirky little detail buried in an old memoir. Apparently, the next day's breakfast was served as usual. Silver polished, napkins folded. The only difference? Every mirror on the main floor was covered. Some say it was morning protocol, others say it was superstition, or maybe someone just didn't want to see their reflection that day. But the guards kept quiet. The staff followed orders. And no official inquiry was made. Not even a letter sent to Philip's family until weeks later. And even then, just a few polite sentences about unfortunate disappearance and unclear intentions. His sister, Aurora von Königsmark, would spend the rest of her life trying to uncover what happened to him, writing letters to courts, begging audiences with royals. She was noble, educated, determined, and completely ignored. Historians still argue whether her investigations ever got close to the truth. Some claim she unearthed key witnesses, but they disappeared. Others suggest she knew more than she ever said and took it to her grave. You pause now in the central hall. Chandeliers hang overhead like frozen rain. The scent of old wood, beeswax, and forgotten perfume still clings to the air. You can hear your own heartbeat. What's more unsettling? The idea that Philip was murdered and hidden here, or that someone made him vanish without leaving so much as a whisper. Even the castle's floor plans offer no help. Over the centuries, Schloss has been rebuilt, redesigned, and even destroyed by Allied bombs during World War II. Today's structure is a partial reconstruction, finished in the 1960s. Some rooms no longer exist. Others never made it onto blueprints to begin with, which means if someone built a hidden chamber, a secret stairwell, a bricked-up alcove, it's entirely possible no one alive today even knows where to look. You trail your hand along the wall, as if feeling for a heartbeat beneath stone. One theory claims Philip's body was lowered into a dry well beneath the castle, later sealed during renovations. Another says he was hidden in a coal chute and smuggled out at dawn, unconscious or worse, buried in the woods nearby. But none of the stories agree. They never do, when no one wants them solved. And so the hall remains quiet. The boots never reclaimed. The blood never confirmed. The truth never confessed. Just you, standing in a hallway built for silence. And somewhere nearby, a secret that decided 300 years ago it had no interest in being found. You leave behind the hallway of vanishing and step into the part of the castle where reality starts to bend, not because the architecture is strange, but because the memory of what happened here has been twisted for centuries. It's not a place on the map anymore. It's a myth, a mystery, a tale told late at night by candlelight, always ending with, "And they never found the body." But tonight, you're determined to look anyway. You push through a creaky wooden door into the old storage wing. This part of Schloss feels neglected, like it remembers too much. The walls are duller, colder, the ceiling dips. This is the area tied to one of the most persistent rumors, the secret room. Local legends say there's a hidden chamber behind one of these walls. Not large, just enough to hide a body, or a body and a secret. Some claim it was a utility room. Others say it was used for private interrogations during the darker periods of the Hanoverian court. No blueprints confirm it. No renovation crew has ever admitted to finding one. But still, the stories circulate. And still, people tap the walls just in case. You do too. Knock, knock, knock. And then hollow, you freeze. It's faint, barely a difference, but it's there. Just a slight change in tone behind the plaster. And it's not where a room should be. That space, according to modern diagrams, should be solid stone. It isn't. No one's broken it open. Not in 300 years. Some say it's out of respect. Others say it's fear. Because to confirm it, to find something, that would be to admit that Philip didn't just disappear. He was erased. Now, here's a solid historical fact. When Sophia Dorothea was placed under house arrest, shortly after Philip vanished, she was forbidden from ever seeing her children again. Her letters were intercepted. Her name was struck from most official records, She wasn't exiled, not quite. She was contained. Like a disease the court didn't want spreading. Her only crime? Loving the wrong man. But what happened to Philip was different. He wasn't tried, punished, or disgraced. He was eliminated. And yet, only partly. Because while the court tried to erase him, they couldn't erase the rumors. Take, for instance, the fringe tidbit passed down in a single-family diary from a kitchen servant's granddaughter. She claimed that her grandmother once saw a pair of men carrying a heavy, cloth-wrapped bundle down to the wine cellars the night of the disappearance. The bundle left a faint trail behind like something bleeding, something still warm. The men told her to go back to her quarters. She never spoke of it again, not until she was old, and even then, only in whispers. You step into the shadowy cellar, the temperature drops, stone walls curve in close around you, racks of wine long since emptied, the labels gone to time, a few spider webs, dust, nothing obvious. But the architecture here is odd. Too many corners, too many turns that lead nowhere. It's the perfect place to lose something, or someone. There's a faint ridge along the floor. You run your toe along it, barely noticeable, like a seam where two tiles meet. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's been waiting for someone to ask a question nobody dared before. Historians still argue whether this entire wing was redesigned after Philip's disappearance to hide something. There are blueprints from 1680 that show 3 storage chambers here, but by 1700, only 2 remain. No explanation, no record of demolition, just absence. And yet, no one ever ordered a proper excavation, no ground-penetrating scans, no formal inquiry. The official word has always been, there's nothing there. That's the part that keeps you up at night. Not what we know, but how carefully we've avoided learning more. You imagine Philip's sister again, Aurora von Königsmarck. Elegant, relentless, heartbroken. She begged for answers from every court in Europe. She wrote to the King of Sweden, the Elector of Brandenburg, even the Pope. All she got were condolences, half-truths, and silence. But she never stopped believing her brother had been murdered. She even returned to Hanover in secret years later, trying to bribe a former servant. The story goes that she got close to something, that the servant began to speak and was found dead the next morning. A heart attack, they said. At 33, you walk back up the stone steps now, out of the cellar, back into candlelight. The silence above seems to have thickened. You're beginning to notice how many people knew something, just not everything. The guards, the kitchen staff, the royal family, even Sophia Dorothea herself perhaps, only had pieces of the puzzle. And that's the terrifying part, because when enough people know only fragments, no one can put the whole truth together. Or maybe that was the point. You return to the hallway outside the guest wing, the corridor where Philip once strolled, reciting poetry and flashing smiles, where he thought love could save them both, where he believed that writing letters and dreaming of escape might be enough. But castles have teeth, and tonight, as you listen to the floor creak, the wind shift, and the walls settle just slightly in the dark, you begin to understand something deeper. Philip Christoph von Königsmarck didn't just die here. He was swallowed, and the castle never gave him back. You move deeper into the belly of Leinenschloss, now into a part of the castle so dense with silence it almost hums. This is where the story starts to ache, because what happens after someone disappears? The world keeps turning. The windows get cleaned. The silver is polished. And the people left behind are quietly destroyed. Sophia Dorothea wakes up the morning after Philip's disappearance with her world in ruins. At first she waits. Maybe he's delayed. Maybe something small went wrong. She sends a message through a trusted servant, a carefully worded note, subtle and cautious. But there's no reply. Another day passes, then another. The silence doesn't grow. It swells like a bruise. You're in her wing now, specifically her writing room. It's quieter than the rest of the castle, softer. The drapes are thick, and the windows overlook a garden that was once hers to tend. But the flowers are gone now. Time has pulled its own kind of curtain. You sit at her writing desk. The ink is dry, but you can almost hear the scratch of the quill. She writes. Of course she does. That's who she is. Letters to Philip, letters to her children, a diary entry with no date, just one line. I have been turned into a ghost with a crown, because here's the historical fact. Sophia wasn't just isolated. She was officially erased. Within weeks, she was accused of infidelity, a betrayal not just of her marriage, but of her country, her court, and her bloodline. She was stripped of her titles, removed from Hanover, barred from ever seeing her son or daughter again. And yet, no trial, no confession, no real evidence, because they didn't need it. The court's narrative was simple and elegant. Philip seduced her. She responded. He fled. She must now pay for the disgrace. It was swift, efficient, and incredibly convenient. You cross into her private chapel, a small, sacred space, tall, arched, and utterly empty. Some say she collapsed here when the news was read to her. Others say she didn't cry at all, that she just stood there, hands clasped, like someone already half gone. Here's the quirky fringe tidbit. Sophia Dorothea wasn't sent to a dungeon or executed. She was redecorated, placed under lifelong house arrest at the castle of Alden, over 100 kilometers away, a place with rose gardens, bookcases, a few attendants, and no doors that locked from the inside, just from the outside. Her only companions were silence and time, and occasionally, a servant with orders not to speak unless spoken to. You imagine her walking those halls, day after day, her clothes growing simpler, her hair turning gray, still writing, still remembering, still waiting for someone to come forward with the truth. No one ever did. Historians still argue whether she had any real agency in the affair at all. Some believe Philip pursued her aggressively, and she was caught in a trap she couldn't escape. Others say she planned the entire elopement, full of fire and fury. The truth? Probably somewhere tangled in the middle. A young woman denied affection for too long. A man who offered her more than just flirtation a way out. But wanting a different life was unforgivable, especially for a woman, and especially when that life threatened to stain the future King of England. Because yes, George, her husband, would go on to become King George I of Great Britain. The same man who barely spoke English, rarely smiled, and never forgave. You're standing now in front of a portrait of him painted years later, after the scandal had faded into official forgetfulness. His face is blank, stern, walled off. It's said he never once mentioned Sophia by name after her exile. Not in court, not in private. She was a closed chapter, sealed and burned. But you know better. Because memory doesn't obey rules. It leaks. It lingers. And so, while the court scrubbed every mention of Philip from their records, letters continued to surface. Little fragments, personal notes from distant cousins. A surviving page from Sophia's journal. A poem scrawled in the margin of a cook's recipe book, signed only with the initials PC. You touch the stone beside you, still warm from the day's sun. The castle has been rebuilt, bombed, and rebuilt again, but this wall? It might have seen her hands, her tears, her slow retreat into silence. They thought they were burying a scandal. They buried a story instead. And as stories do, this one began to slip the noose. You leave the royal wing behind and head toward the library, a newer section of the castle, built on top of older rooms. The shelves groan with time, and the ceiling sags slightly, as if tired of carrying so many unanswered questions. One final thing. Decades later, when Sophia Dorothea died, she was still imprisoned. She hadn't spoken to her children in over 30 years. Her body was transported quietly, buried without ceremony, and for a long time, her grave was unmarked. She died invisible, just like Philip. Except you're here now, listening, remembering, not letting the quiet win. So you light the candle, walk the next corridor. Because the story isn't over yet, not while the walls are still listening. You step into the library, where light filters in just enough to make the dust sparkle midair like 1,000 secrets trapped in suspension. This isn't just a place of books. It's a graveyard of things not said. And right now, you're here to dig. The castle's original library is long gone, destroyed by war, rebuilt in pieces, moved over time. But records were salvaged, translated, and cataloged by people who couldn't stop asking questions. Because even centuries later, The disappearance of Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck refuses to stay buried. You pull a leather-bound ledger from the shelf. Pages crackle. This one's a record of the Hanoverian court's expenses. Most of it is dry. Food costs, stabling, wages. But in July 1,694 days after Philip vanished, there's a sudden unexplained payment to a contractor in the region of Hoya. The entry reads, "For masonry work in lower storage vault, completed with urgency." Curious, isn't it? You trace the lines of the page, fingertips catching on ink that's older than many nations. What did they wall up? And why the rush? Here's a mainstream historical fact. European courts were masters of political containment. Scandal didn't need to be solved. It needed to be suffocated. What mattered was not justice, but optics. A vanished nobleman? Troubling. But a love affair that embarrassed the royal family? Unforgivable. The smoother the disappearance, the stronger the dynasty. You flip to another page this time. A letter from a French diplomat who visited Hanover that year. His tone is breezy, almost mocking. The Swedish count? Ah, he must have offended someone with a sword, or a title. One disappears quite easily in such circles. He underlines the word disappears. You stare at it. He knew, but knowing isn't proof. That's the problem with every source you examine. They hint, they imply, but no one dares commit the truth to ink. And so you find yourself piecing together a puzzle where half the pieces were thrown into the Rhine. And then you find the letter. It's a copy, not an original preserved in the archives of Sophia Dorothea's exiled household at Alden. It's addressed to "My dearest," signed simply, "Yours, with all that remains." The handwriting is shaky, but the words are heavy. They have taken you from me without voice, without reason. They think silence is their triumph, but I will keep your name alive, if only in my heart, until the end. Historians still argue whether the letter was ever sent, or even meant to be. Some claim it was a page from a diary. Others argue it was a forgery made later by sympathetic friends or writers, looking to romanticize the tragedy. But the tone, it bleeds, and then a name appears in another book. Not Philip, but Lieutenant von Düring, a relatively obscure military officer stationed at Leineschloss in the summer of 1694. His records are strangely clean. No complaints, no commendations, just neutral. Except for one entry, buried in a report filed months later. It mentions a special midnight rotation of guards, ordered on July Honest. Only 6 men were involved. None of their names appear again in the archives after that week. Not retired, not reassigned, just gone. Another quirky tidbit. A musical composer who worked at the court during that time, Johann Sigismund Kusser, suddenly left Hanover that same week without explanation. He moved to Hamburg, and later London. He refused to speak of his time at court ever again. And his next opera, titled The Silent Room. Coincidence? Maybe. But maybe not. You pace the length of the library now, past shelves groaning with unspoken things. It occurs to you that Leineschloss isn't haunted by a ghost, it's haunted by a cover-up. The murder or disappearance, if you want to keep it polite, was never really about Philip. Not entirely. He was a threat, not because of who he was, but because of what he knew, what he represented. He knew about Sophia's letters, her unhappiness, her plans, and if he talked, if word spread that the future King of England couldn't control his own household, that was unacceptable. So someone, whether George himself, his mother, a council of advisors, or some loyal fixer in a dark hallway, made a choice. A final one. And once that choice was made, everything after it was just housekeeping. You stop in front of the library's fireplace. Cold now, but once roaring. In 1702, it said that George personally ordered a thorough cleaning of all court documents related to that summer. Logs were burned, journals misplaced, scribes reassigned. The paper trail was reduced to ashes, one hearth at a time. But not everything burns. A fragment here, a whisper there, a missing guard, a curious payment, a composer who fled mid-song, and a woman alone in a distant castle still writing letters to someone who would never reply. As you walk out of the library, the door groans like it doesn't want to close. The pages behind you settle back into place. The dust spins gently in the fading light. And you realize something else. This isn't a story about death. It's a story about removal, the art of unmaking a person so thoroughly that they become more myth than man. But the castle remembers, and so do you. You move away from the dusty shelves of Schloss's library and step out into the castle's open courtyard, where the wind brushes past your cheeks like a whisper, cold and indifferent. The sky is heavy with the color of tin, and the clouds seem to press down on the rooflines as if trying to hush the building entirely. This is where people gathered for fresh air, for conversation, for rumors dressed up as observations. And it's here, right underfoot, that one of the strangest footnotes in the case took place. A year after Philip's disappearance, a small group of groundskeepers began digging to plant new trees along the southern wall. Nothing unusual until one of them struck something solid, and not at the expected depth. It wasn't stone, and it wasn't root. According to a barely legible note in the maintenance logs preserved almost by accident, it was a box of military kind, heavy, iron. The box was immediately removed. No one knows where it went. No one admitted to seeing what was inside. But by that evening, the section of garden was fenced off and covered, and a new order came down from the top. No further planting on castle grounds without official supervision. Now that's suspicious. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Most European palaces had strict hierarchies for reporting irregularities. Discoveries, especially ones that might connect to scandal, were to be handed over to a special council. But in this case, the official record goes completely silent after that incident. The very next entry in the ledger? Fence replaced, area secured. And that's it. You wander over to that spot now. Of course, the landscaping has changed over centuries, but old maps, cross-referenced with a few personal journals from the era, suggest this is where the tree line broke awkwardly, like something had once interrupted the design. Some say the iron box contained personal effects letters, a signet ring, maybe even a weapon. Others believe it was a container used to hide a body. After all, if you had just one night to make someone vanish forever, an iron box buried in the gardens is a start. But you know what makes this even creepier? According to court gossip recorded decades later, the Queen Mother Sophia of the Palatinate was seen walking the southern gardens late at night in the weeks following the disappearance. Always alone, always silent. One servant recalled seeing her stop by that fenced-off area and just stand there. Not praying, not mourning, just staring. A fringe theory suggests she orchestrated the entire thing, not out of cruelty, but calculation. She was brilliant, politically savvy, and laser-focused on elevating the House of Hanover. A scandal involving her daughter-in-law on a foreign count? That could derail everything. So she acted. And then she waited for time to clean up the rest. You stand now at the far edge of the grounds, looking back at the castle. From here, the windows seem empty, just glass and stone. But you know better. This place is filled with eyes past and present. Another detail. Years later, in 1716, while Sophia Dorothea was still imprisoned at Alden, a letter arrived in London addressed to a royal physician. It was unsigned and written in poor French, but it mentioned the bones under the orchard and the one who wears no boots. It was dismissed as a prank, burned. But you remember the boots, don't you? Always the boots. You step into the path where the orchard once grew. The fruit trees are gone, but the ground still seems soft here, malleable, like something could still be beneath the surface. You crouch, press your fingers into the earth. It's cold, and it keeps its secrets well. Historians still argue whether anything was ever buried on the castle grounds at all. Some claim it's pure folklore. Others are convinced the grounds were altered to hide something after 1694. No archaeological dig has ever been permitted. But here's something more recent. In 1971, a team of local historians petitioned for ground radar scans of the southern lawn. The request was denied twice without explanation. You glance down at your own feet, imagining the iron box again. The sound it might have made being dropped into a shallow hole. The quiet panic of midnight burial. The click of a shovel against bone. And you realize the court didn't just remove Philip's body. They removed context. The things that make a disappearance meaningful. Motive, memory, physical trace. Because what's more terrifying than a murder? A murder where the building itself becomes the accomplice. You rise again, brushing your hands off. The breeze has shifted now. It carries the sharpness of coming rain, and something else, something you can't quite name. Not sorrow, not fear, just presence. You walk slowly back toward the stone arches. Every part of the courtyard feels layered, not with ghosts, but with choices, with people who decided not to tell the truth, with whispers passed down until they weren't whispers anymore, they were architecture. And you can't help but think, what else does this castle know? What else is it still hiding? Because if silence can last this long, it's probably not just luck, it's design. You step back inside Schloss, where the walls are dry again and the shadows feel heavier. You can feel it now, the truth pressing in from all sides, like it's trapped just behind the next door, just beneath the next floorboard, just beyond the next whisper. But no one ever opens that door. This section of the castle is rarely visited by tourists today. It's a wing of partial reconstructions and forgotten archives, rooms that exist more on paper than in function. And yet, according to a few obscure inventories from the late 1600s, this was where the court stored its special records. Documents marked for private circulation only. Among them, a curious volume, Register of Matters Not for Public Record. It no longer exists, but a 19th century historian claimed to have read parts of it before it mysteriously disappeared from the state library in 1831. According to his notes, the book included entries on disciplinary hearings, diplomatic errors, and one unsigned entry labeled only Resolution 8 concerning disappearance, 1 July. No names, no details, but the timeline fits exactly. You press your palm against a thick doorframe, probably rebuilt, possibly original. A deep part of you hopes it's the latter, that some fragment of that night still lingers in the grain. Because as more documents vanish and more rumors dilute into myth, the castle itself becomes the only reliable witness. And it's not talking. Let's shift to Sophia Dorothea again. After Philip's disappearance, she is moved with calculated cruelty. She isn't dragged through the streets or locked in a dungeon. She's quietly removed. A closed carriage, a new residence, a carefully composed statement about her ill health and need for seclusion. It's the royal version of pressing mute. She's relocated to Alden Castle, where she will live for the rest of her life, more than 3 decades. Never leaving, never receiving visitors without approval, never allowed to speak freely. Her world shrinks to a set of rooms, a fenced garden, and a clock that ticks a little louder each year. You close your eyes now and imagine her routine. She wakes early, reads, walks the same loop of gravel path, watches the birds, writes letters to no one who answers. The news she receives is months old, heavily redacted, passed through layers of supervision. Her children grow up strangers. Her name is erased from court portraits. One of her attendants, in a memoir written years later, said Sophia would sometimes pause mid-conversation and glance toward the door, as if waiting for someone. She never said who, but everyone knew. Philip. There's a scholarly debate, one that still persists, about whether Sophia ever truly believed he died. Some think she clung to hope, even decades later, that she believed he'd return, announce his survival, and free her from this gilded coffin. Others argue she knew from the start that the silence was answer enough, that the lack of a body was the answer. You walk into what was once a side parlor, now converted into a nondescript office space. But in the 17th century, this was a meeting room, a place where royal advisors would gather. And it was here, allegedly, that the decision was finalized. The disappearance, the silencing, the cover-up, the clean solution. It's said there were only 5 men in the room that night. Each took a different piece of the responsibility. One to arrange the guard change, one to escort the count, one to dispose of the remains, one to rewrite the logs, and only one to speak directly to George. Their names were never recorded together, but small pieces survive. Signatures on conflicting reports, payment requests that make no sense, transfer orders filed the next day, all gone within the year. Here's a quirky fringe detail. A floorboard in this very room, third plank from the east window, was lifted during a renovation in 1954. Underneath, workers found a rusted clasp from an officer's sash and an envelope, long decayed, containing traces of wax seal. The contents? Dust. Nothing legible. But someone once tried to hide something here. You crouch over that same spot now, press your fingertips to the wood, and you ask the same question that's haunted everyone who's ever touched this case. Why go to so much trouble? Why silence an affair that wasn't even that uncommon for royalty? Why erase a man entirely instead of sending him away, discrediting him, or framing him? Maybe it's because the truth was worse than the affair. Maybe Philip knew something. Some scholars suggest he possessed letters, real letters, exposing not just a romance, but deeper court corruption. Hidden debts, blackmail, illegitimate children, plans for political rebellion. If true, those letters were either destroyed or still hidden, somewhere. And if that's the case, then Philip wasn't just a lover. He was a threat. You stand slowly, letting the silence settle. Your heartbeat is loud in your ears. The castle is calm, but it doesn't feel peaceful. It feels rehearsed. Like every creak and echo is part of a performance designed to distract you from what really happened. Because in the end, this story isn't just about a disappearance or a doomed romance. It's about the terrifying efficiency of power, how quickly it moves, how thoroughly it cleans, how easily a man can be unmade if enough important people decide he no longer fits the picture. You walk down the hallway now, past portraits of other nobles with names you've never heard. None of them are Philip. None of them are Sophia. They were painted over literally and figuratively. And yet, you're still here, still asking, still listening for the answer that never comes. You follow the corridor until it gently slopes downward, past low-arched ceilings, and into what once served as the castle's administrative heart. In the late 1600s, this area was buzzing with activity scribes, scratching quills, pages running between rooms, the occasional whisper tucked into a passing glance. This was the engine room of the court, and if any part of Lanischloss kept meticulous records, it was here. Which is why it's so strange how little was documented after July. Honest, 1694. Not nothing, just less. Too little. You find yourself in front of a heavy wooden cabinet oak, burnished by time. The brass plate reads, Correspondence Archive, though most of the letters were removed long ago. Still, a few remain unremarkable pieces, mostly shopping lists, requests for coal, a bill for 7 new wigs. But between 2 brittle envelopes, there's something unexpected. A folded piece of parchment, nearly translucent with age. You slide it out gently. The handwriting is hurried, and the ink has bled, but the words are legible enough. He will not go quietly. He has spoken to the wrong ones. If it is to be done, it must be tonight, before it spreads. No date, no signature. But the paper's watermark matches those used for royal directives in the 1690s, and the phrase "before it spreads" seems less about gossip and more about danger. Like Philip was carrying something volatile information, perhaps. Not scandal, leverage. There's a fringe theory among certain academic circles that Philip had stumbled onto something deeper, a political conspiracy involving foreign alliances. Sweden, France, Brandenburg. Letters intercepted, message mistranslated, loyalties questioned. If he had proof, if he threatened to use it as leverage to secure his future with Sophia Dorothea, that would make him not just inconvenient, it would make him dangerous. You place the paper back. Its weight lingers in your hand even after it's gone. Moving farther into the archive, you spot another oddity. An inventory list from the castle armory, filed exactly 2 days after Philip's disappearance. It notes the usual: a missing dagger, a replaced scabbard, but one entry is scratched out, as if someone tried to erase it. Borrowed item, breastplate, light, returned broken. Borrowed, returned, broken. No name, no reason, no mention of why a breastplate, something rarely used inside palace walls, would be needed during peacetime. It's moments like this when the silence becomes not absence, but evidence. Historians still argue whether Philip died inside Lanischloss or was spirited out dead or alive into the woods beyond Hanover. The official stance even today is simply unknown, but evidence keeps trickling in. In 1924, a group of school children digging in a field just outside the city wall discovered bone fragments wrapped in cloth. and buried with fragments of a ceremonial sword. The local authorities dismissed the find as a soldier's remains from the Napoleonic Wars. Except the cloth? A rare weave used only by the Swedish court in the 17th century. The remains vanished during World War II. Of course they did. You walk through what's now a display hallway, glass cases filled with noble rings, portraits, crests. There's no plaque for Philip, no acknowledgement. He's a ghost, unwelcome in official history, but you spot something anyway. In a dusty corner display, a faded page from an old visitor's log. July Honest, 1694. Count Philipp Christoph von Königsmark. Signature clear and deliberate. And directly underneath, a second name. D. von Marenstein. Not a name that appears in court records. Not a name that appears again. You blink, trying to recall where you've heard it, and then it clicks. A letter from a royal servant to his cousin mentioned. A foreign gentleman in fine boots and bad French, seen leaving the Count's room the night he vanished. The gentleman never checked out. You look back at the name. Still legible. Still sitting there, as if daring you to ask. Who was he? Another guard? An assassin? A double? Some believe Philip had a decoy, that he suspected betrayal and brought someone else to act in his place, an agent, a distraction. The idea sounds ridiculous, except for the fact that no two witness reports from that night ever agree on what Philip was wearing. Blue sash, no sash, long boots, short coat, hair teed, hair loose. Too many contradictions, too much fog. You step away from the glass, your reflection briefly catching in the pane. You look tired, haunted even, like someone who's spent too long chasing a ghost. And that's what Philip has become. A masterclass in erasure. Not just of a person, but of a possibility. The possibility that love could triumph in a royal court, that a woman might choose passion over duty, that the system could be outwitted. Instead, the court reminded everyone how it worked. One whisper, one night, one missing man, and a young woman, alone for the rest of her life. You lean against the cold stone wall and take a deep breath. The air is dry here, filled with too many unspoken things. And still, somehow, Philip feels close. Not in a supernatural way, but in a statistical way. There were too many lies, too many half-truths, too many people who suddenly changed jobs, moved countries, died unexpectedly, or left journals unfinished. Something happened here, and the castle still remembers it. You descend now into the castle's final level, the foundations. The stones here are older, rougher, laid long before Philip ever arrived. Some sections are original, others patched after wars and fire, but all of it pulses with the quiet ache of time. This is where stories lose their polish, where the whispers grow teeth, the passage narrows, the air thickens, and for a moment, you feel like you're not walking through a castle at all, but through the underside of a memory, one that's trying not to be found. This was once the servants' route, a low-ceilinged maze meant to keep movement hidden. But according to an anonymous 18th century report, once smuggled out of the archives before vanishing again, this level was used for internal corrections, a euphemism, most believe, for private interrogations or political purges. And that's what leads you here, to the drainage room. Doesn't sound ominous at first, until you realize that in 1694, this room was kept locked at all times. It was outfitted with stone basins, heavy hooks, and drainage grates in the floor, ostensibly for cleaning game, or storing water barrels during long winters. But no one can explain why the drainage room required reinforced doors, or why there was a full-length iron ring bolted into the back wall, now removed, but once used for containment. Containment of what? You shine a soft light across the stone. Old water stains, a few illegible scratches, but one carving catches your eye tiny, just above the baseboard, almost hidden. PC. Now, it could be coincidence. Initials like that aren't rare. Could belong to a mason, or a servant, or the last person to ever stand in this room alive. You kneel beside it, run your thumb over the letters. They're deep, deliberate, not panicked but carved with purpose, as if someone had a moment, just one, to leave something. A fringe detail that fuels this room's dark legend? In 1889, a group of students from Göttingen were granted rare access to this level of the castle as part of a historical study. One student later wrote in his private journal that he felt a physical pressure in the old water room, as if air refused to move. He also noted a strange discoloration in the floor, something he described as not rust, not mildew, not age, something like regret. The university claimed he had overactive nerves. You stay a little longer in the quiet. Your ears adjust. Somewhere above, footsteps echo. Somewhere behind you, water drips soft and rhythmic. It's not fear that keeps you still. It's reverence. This might be the place. The last place. Historians still argue whether Philip was murdered outright or held for some time before being disposed of. The evidence is maddeningly vague. One theory suggests he was interrogated for hours, pressured to reveal the scope of his relationship with Sophia Dorothea, or worse, the names of those supporting them. Another claims he was told to renounce her, that if he agreed, he could leave Hanover alive, that his refusal was the final nail in the coffin. Either way, this part of the castle feels like the end of something. You rise, gently, and continue along the corridor. It twists, turns. A draft slides past your face as you pass an old archway. Beyond it, a collapsed tunnel, now blocked with rubble. But early 20th century blueprints suggest it once led directly to a carriage entrance outside the city walls. An escape route, or a disposal route, depending on who used it. The tunnel is impassable now, and maybe that's for the best. What's down there, if anything, belongs to a chapter of history that chose not to be read. But the implication is clear. If someone wanted to remove a body, or a living man who would shortly become a body, this was the path. No parade, no screaming, just a quiet walk into the earth. One more eerie detail. In the 1980s, a local maintenance team doing foundation repairs near this area discovered a gap in the floor beneath the gravel. They claimed it was an unmarked shaft, possibly a collapsed cistern. Before anyone could study it, the area was refilled and sealed, citing safety concerns. No images, no follow-up. Of course, you retrace your steps now, back toward the main cellar. The castle creaks above, but you've grown used to its voice. It's not trying to scare you. It's just old, tired, heavy with what it holds and what it hides. As you climb back toward the ground floor, the air slowly warms again. The stone turns to wood. The corridors straighten. But something has changed. You've seen too much. The cracks are visible now. You pass a portrait in the hall, George I, as King of England. A man cast in oil, stiff and cold, staring forward with that unmistakable Hanoverian expression. Do not ask, but you have asked. And you're not done yet. Because while this story began as a disappearance, what it's really become is a test of memory. Can a man be erased so completely that even time gives up looking? Or do the pieces eventually realign slowly, quietly, beautifully, and spell his name again? PC von Königsmarck. He was here, and somewhere, maybe still, a part of him is. You emerge into the upper halls again. Warmer now, quieter. The late light filters in through tall, narrow windows, painting pale streaks across the parquet floor. It's the hour of ghosts, if you believe in that sort of thing. But tonight, you don't need a haunting. The truth has lingered long enough to carry its own chill. And now, all that's left is legacy. Because even though Philip Christoph von Königsmarck vanished without a body, a trial, or a grave, he somehow never left. His name may be missing from official ledgers, but it lives in the margins, scratched in code, whispered in rumors, passed through generations of curious scribes and stubborn historians. He's the question that refuses to resolve, the blot in the corner of the royal portrait. And standing here, in this hallway, lined with portraits of those who remained the kings and queens, the chancellors and counts, you realize something odd. Philip might be the most remembered of them all, not because of power, because of absence. His story is told not in victories, but in fragments. A stray button, a scribbled name, a forgotten payment, and most of all, in Sophia Dorothea's exile. 30 years of confinement, no court, no pardon, no voice. Every year, she sent one letter to the king, her former husband, asking for freedom. Every year, it was ignored. She died in 1726, having never seen her children again. Buried at night, without ceremony, in a family tomb that didn't bear her name until much later. A fringe detail worth noting. When George I died while visiting Hanover in 1727, just months after Sophia's death, he was transported back to England in a lead coffin. But during the journey, a great storm struck, and the ship was forced to anchor in port for repairs. Some say it wasn't the storm. Some say it was her. You smile a little at that, not because it's true, but because maybe it should be. Historians still argue whether George ever felt guilt. Some say he visited Alden Castle once, under disguise, to look at her through a window. Others believe he never gave her another thought, that he buried the past like he buried his accent, his joy, and eventually, himself. But you suspect something else, because erasure always leaves a scar. The more forcefully you try to forget, the deeper the shape of what was. And Philip? He left a deep one. In the 19th century, a German playwright, Friedrich Hebel, wrote a fictionalized account of the scandal. In it, Philip is portrayed not as a knight or a rogue, but as a question mark in human form. A man whose greatest act was not loving too boldly, but refusing to go quietly. That, perhaps, is his real legacy. Refusing to disappear no matter how many people tried to make it so. You move slowly through the last chamber, a vaulted gallery now used for public exhibits. On the far wall, you see a reproduction of a letter believed to be Sophia Dorothea's final correspondence, unfinished, unsigned, and possibly never sent. It reads, "You can silence a name, but not a love. Just 7 words, and you believe them." You reach the final corridor, where modern lights flicker gently against centuries-old stone. The air smells of wax and wood polish. Outside, the moon has begun to rise over Hanover, and somewhere just out of reach, Philip walks the castle again. Not with boots or blade, but with memory. He was here, and so were you. So now, with the corridors behind you and the castle settling once more into its slow, breathless slumber, you let yourself drift. You're not in Lanischloss anymore. You're back in your room. Still, quiet, cocooned in the soft rhythm of your own breathing. Maybe a fan hums gently nearby, or maybe the night holds only silence. And yet, that silence doesn't feel empty. It feels full of questions never answered, full of steps never retraced, full of one man's presence, echoing just far enough to keep you listening. Let your mind soften now, like paper dissolving in warm water. Let Philip fade not as a loss, but as a presence too big to hold in one place. You don't need to carry the entire mystery anymore. You've walked it, seen it, heard the stories the castle still refuses to bury. And now, it's okay to let it go. Let the sharpness of the stone blur into velvet. Let the candlelight from the long, echoing halls dim to a gentle, glowing hum behind your eyes. Picture the moon above Hanover silver, slow and steady, watching the rooftops of a city that no longer remembers the scandal it once hid. Breathe in, long, gentle. Exhale, softer still. Philip is gone, but he was never forgotten. And you? You've stayed long enough. So close your eyes, rest your hands, let the walls around you vanish, and drift. 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 End of script. Sweet dreams.